You won't believe what happened in my kitchen this Christmas Eve. It started with a single shout and ended with something none of us could have ever imagined. Stay with me, because the twist at the end will leave you speechless. Christmas Eve is supposed to be a time of warmth, laughter, and the kind of chaos that makes for good stories years down the line. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment my daughter, Linda, bellowed from the kitchen, "Where are you, you shameless incompetent? The 20 people I invited are already here and the food isn't ready." The words shot through the house like a jolt of electricity, freezing everyone in their tracks. I was in the dining room, carefully arranging the last of the mismatched napkins when her voice, sharp as a carving knife, cut through the hum of holiday chatter. I could see the shock ripple through the room. My bridge club friends, who had come early to help and now sat clutching their sherry glasses a little tighter, Linda's in-laws, who always seemed to be silently evaluating my every move, now wide-eyed and silent, and sweet old Mrs. Jenkins from next door, who nearly dropped her legendary fruitcake in sheer surprise. The room, which had been filled with the gentle clinking of glasses and the soft murmur of conversation, fell utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop, if it weren't for the sound of my pressure cooker in the kitchen, hissing and sputtering like a snake about to strike, as if it too was offended by Linda's outburst. I stood there, napkin in hand, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief washing over me. Did she really just call her own mother incompetent on Christmas Eve, in front of everyone? Oh yes, she did. And the look on everyone's faces was absolutely priceless. Mouths agape, eyes darting between Linda and me, as if waiting for the next act in a play they hadn't realized they'd bought tickets for. Linda, for her part, was standing in the kitchen doorway, hands on her hips, her face flushed with frustration and the kind of determination that only comes from years of trying to make every holiday perfect. She had always been a force of nature, my Linda, organized, ambitious, and if I'm being honest, a little bit dramatic. She'd taken it upon herself to invite half the neighborhood this year, determined to host a Christmas Eve that would be remembered for years to come. But as the minutes ticked by and the food remained stubbornly unfinished, her patience had clearly reached its breaking point. I could see her scanning the room, her eyes landing on me with a mixture of accusation and desperation, as if I alone stood between her and holiday perfection. For a moment, I considered snapping back, reminding her of all the Christmases I'd pulled off without a hitch, all the times I'd juggled turkey, ham, and 3 kinds of pie without so much as a raised voice. But instead, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves and remind myself that this, too, would one day be a funny story. The guests, meanwhile, didn't know where to look. My bridge club friends exchanged nervous glances, their eyebrows raised in silent communication. Linda's in-laws shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly wishing they could disappear into the wallpaper. Mrs. Jenkins, bless her heart, just clutched her fruitcake a little tighter, as if it might shield her from the family drama unfolding before her eyes. Even the children, who had been running circles around the coffee table moments before, stopped in their tracks, sensing that something significant had just happened. I could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on me, waiting to see how I would respond. Would I crumble under the pressure, or would I rise to the occasion as I had so many times before? I glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands inching ever closer to dinner time. The turkey was still in the oven, the potatoes were only half mashed, and the green bean casserole was sitting on the counter, waiting for its turn in the now overcrowded oven. The kitchen looked like a battlefield, pots and pans stacked precariously, flour dusting every surface, and a growing pile of dirty dishes threatening to topple at any moment. I had been up since the crack of dawn, determined to make this Christmas Eve special, but somewhere between basting the turkey and whipping the cream, things had started to unravel. The oven was acting up, the potatoes were being stubborn, and I was beginning to wonder if I had bitten off more than I could chew this year. But as I stood there, surrounded by the chaos and the expectant faces of my family and friends, something inside me shifted. I remembered all the Christmases past, the ones that had gone off without a hitch, and the ones that had been saved by quick thinking and a sense of humor. I thought of the year the dog ate the ham, the time the power went out and we ate dinner by candlelight, and the Christmas when Uncle Joe got stuck in the chimney, a story for another time. Those were the holidays we remembered, the ones we laughed about long after the dishes were done and the decorations packed away. Maybe, I thought, this would be one of those years. So, I straightened my apron, squared my shoulders, and did what any self-respecting mother would do. I put on my best smile and marched into the kitchen, ready to face the music and my daughter. Linda was pacing back and forth, her phone in one hand, a spatula in the other, muttering about schedules and guests and how this was supposed to be the perfect Christmas. I set my napkin down and said, as calmly as I could, "Linda, sometimes things don't go according to plan. The oven's acting up, the potatoes are being stubborn, and I could use a little help instead of a lecture." For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't quite believe I'd spoken up. But before she could respond, the pressure cooker let out another shriek, and we both jumped. I couldn't help it, I started to laugh. Not a polite little chuckle, but a full-on, belly-shaking laugh that echoed through the kitchen and, I'm sure, into the living room. Linda's face softened, just a bit. Mom, I'm sorry. I just wanted everything to be perfect. I reached out and squeezed her hand. Honey, perfection is overrated. Besides, if everything went smoothly, what would we have to laugh about next year? She smiled, and for a moment, the tension melted away. But just as I thought we might have a peaceful Christmas after all, the doorbell rang, the dog started barking, and someone in the living room called out, "Is everything all right in there?" I looked at Linda, and she looked at me, and we both knew this Christmas Eve was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. And as I wiped my hands on my apron and headed to answer the door, I couldn't help but wonder, what else could possibly go wrong tonight? But here's the thing, Linda had no idea what was about to happen next, and neither did I. Let's rewind a bit, because if you're going to understand the full scope of my Christmas Eve kitchen meltdown, you need to know how it all began. I'd been up since 5 a.m., fueled by nothing but determination and a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, determined to pull off the kind of holiday feast that would make Norman Rockwell weep with envy. The turkey was a behemoth, easily the size of a small child, and I'd spent the better part of the morning wrestling it into submission, muttering under my breath about why I ever thought a 22-pound bird was a good idea for a family of 20. The kitchen counters were a battlefield, littered with potato peelings, carrot tops, and the occasional rogue cranberry that had rolled under the fridge, never to be seen again. I had enough side dishes in progress to feed an army: mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, sweet potato sauce stuffing, and of course my famous homemade rolls, which were rising, hopefully, in the laundry room because I'd run out of counter space. The house was filled with the comforting, chaotic smells of the holidays: roasting turkey, simmering gravy, and just a hint of burnt sugar from the batch of pecan pie bars that had gotten a little too friendly with the oven. I was in my element, apron on, hair pulled back, Christmas music playing softly in the background, and for a brief shining moment I thought I had everything under control. But then, somewhere between mashing the potatoes and assembling the green bean casserole, disaster struck. The oven, my faithful companion through decades of holiday meals, decided it had had enough. 1 minute it was humming along, the next, poof, gone, no heat, no light, just a faint smell of something electrical and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I stared at it in disbelief, willing it to come back to life, but it just sat there, stubborn and silent, as if mocking my best laid plans. Panic set in. The turkey was only half cooked, the rolls were waiting their turn, and the casseroles were lined up like little soldiers, ready for battle. I tried everything, flipping the breaker, jiggling the knobs, even giving it a gentle kick for good measure, but nothing worked. The oven was dead, and with it, my dreams of a perfect Christmas dinner. So there I was, standing in the middle of my kitchen, flour on my face and a wild look in my eyes, frantically Googling how to cook a turkey with a hairdryer. Don't judge, I was desperate, when Linda stormed in. She took one look at the chaos: the half-cooked turkey, the mountain of dirty dishes, the casserole that was starting to look suspiciously soupy, and let loose with her now legendary yell. "Dubachir eou, heotuokam, T20 I even mepi air le80 and tifo ds in right eye." Her voice echoed off the tile, bouncing around the kitchen and out into the living room, where I could hear the sudden hush as our guests realized something was very, very wrong. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but there was no time to dwell on it. The pressure was on, and I was the only thing standing between our family and a Christmas dinner of cold cuts and potato chips. Fear? Oh, I felt it. The kind that makes your palms sweat and your heart race, that tightens your chest and makes you wonder if you're about to burst into tears or start laughing hysterically. Would Christmas be ruined? Would everyone go home hungry, grumbling about the year Grandma finally lost her touch? Would Linda ever forgive me for letting down in front of her in-laws, her friends, and, worst of all, Mrs. Jenkins, who had never missed a chance to remind me of the time I burned the Easter ham? I could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on me, and for a moment, I wanted nothing more than to crawl into the pantry and hide behind the canned yams until New Year's. But then something unexpected happened. As I stood there, paralyzed by fear and indecision, the kitchen door swung open and in walked my neighbor Tom, carrying a giant tray of lasagna. "Heard you were in a bind," he said with a wink, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to show up at someone else's Christmas dinner with enough pasta to feed a small country. Before I could even process what was happening, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at my elbow, offering her famous deviled eggs with a conspiratorial smile. "You know, dear, sometimes the best meals are the ones you don't plan," she whispered, patting my hand. The Bridge Club ladies sprang into action, commandeering the microwave and the stovetop, whipping up salads and reheating casseroles with the kind of efficiency that only comes from years of competitive card playing. Even Linda's husband, who usually couldn't boil water without supervision, started slicing bread and arranging cheese platters like a man possessed. Suddenly, the kitchen was alive with energy, laughter, and the clatter of dishes. The fear that had threatened to overwhelm me was replaced by a strange, exhilarating sense of excitement. Maybe dinner wouldn't be perfect, but it would be memorable. Maybe we wouldn't have turkey and all the trimmings, but we'd have lasagna, deviled eggs, and enough side dishes to keep everyone happy. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the Christmas we'd talk about for years to come, not because everything went according to plan, but because it didn't. As I looked around at the flurry of activity, I realized that the true spirit of the holidays wasn't about perfect meals or flawless execution. It was about coming together, rolling with the punches, and finding joy in the unexpected. Linda, still flustered but clearly relieved, caught my eye and gave me a sheepish smile. "Sorry, Mom," she said quietly. "I just wanted everything to be perfect." I squeezed her hand, feeling the tension melt away. "Honey, perfection is overrated. Besides, who needs a turkey when you've got lasagna and love?" We both laughed, and for the first time all day, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The kitchen meltdown had turned into a kitchen miracle, and as we carried the makeshift feast into the dining room, I knew that this was a Christmas none of us would ever forget. And as the laughter and chatter filled the house once more, I couldn't help but wonder, what other surprises did this night have in store for us? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the best memories are made when things don't go according to plan. Just as I was about to burst into tears, feeling the weight of the ruined dinner and my daughter's disappointment pressing down on me like a sack of potatoes, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron, took a shaky breath, and shuffled to the door, half expecting another guest to arrive early and witness the chaos firsthand. But when I opened it, there stood my neighbor Tom, grinning from ear to ear and holding a giant tray of lasagna that looked, and smelled, like it had been blessed by the Italian grandmother I never had. "Heard you were in a bind," he said with a wink, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all year. "Figured you could use a little Italian backup." For a second I just stared at him, not sure whether to laugh or cry, but then I did both, right there on the front porch, as Tom handed me the tray and gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Don't worry, we've all been there," he whispered, and I believed him. It was as if the universe had decided to throw me a lifeline, wrapped in layers of pasta, cheese, and homemade sauce. Before I could even set the lasagna down, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at my elbow, her arms full of Tupperware containers and her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I brought my famous deviled eggs," she announced, as if she'd just won the lottery. "A little something extra for the grown-ups." She winked and produced a bottle of her special eggnog, which, if memory served, could knock out a horse. The Bridge Club ladies, never ones to miss an opportunity for a little culinary adventure, sprang into action. They commandeered the kitchen, opening cabinets and drawers with the confidence of women who'd spent decades running their own households. In no time at all, they were whipping up a salad from the odds and ends in my fridge, tossing together greens, cranberries, walnuts, and a vinaigrette that tasted like Christmas in a bowl. Even Linda's husband, who usually couldn't boil water without setting off the smoke alarm, started slicing bread with the precision of a seasoned chef, arranging the pieces on a platter and sprinkling them with herbs he found in my spice rack. I watched in amazement as my kitchen, which had been a scene of disaster just moments before, transformed into a bustling hub of teamwork and laughter. Excitement buzzed through the house, replacing the tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud. The guests, sensing that something special was happening, drifted into the kitchen to offer their help or just to watch the spectacle unfold. Someone put on a Christmas playlist, and soon the sounds of Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole mingled with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation. The children, who had been growing restless in the living room, peeked around the corner, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Is dinner ready yet?" one of them asked, and I couldn't help but smile. "Almost, sweetheart," I replied, "and it's going to be a dinner you'll never forget." The truth was, I'd never seen anything like it. People who barely knew each other were working side by side, sharing stories, swapping recipes, and laughing at the absurdity of it all. The Bridge Club ladies taught Linda's in-laws how to make a proper vinaigrette, while Tom regaled the kids with tales of his own holiday disasters. Even Mrs. Jenkins, who was usually a bit of a stickler for tradition, seemed to be enjoying herself, sipping her eggnog and offering unsolicited advice to anyone within earshot. As the final touches were put on our impromptu feast, I took a moment to step back and take it all in. The dining table, which I'd so carefully set earlier in the day, was now overflowing with a hodgepodge of dishes: lasagna, deviled eggs, salad, bread, and a few casseroles that had managed to survive the oven's untimely demise. It wasn't the meal I'd planned, but it was a meal made with love, generosity, and a healthy dose of improvisation. We squeezed around the table, pulling up extra chairs and making room for everyone, even the neighbors who'd just stopped by to drop off a dish but ended up staying for the fun. Plates were piled high, glasses were filled, and for the first time all day, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The laughter was contagious, spreading from one end of the table to the other, until even Linda, who had been so stressed just an hour before, was giggling at a story Tom was telling about the time he accidentally set his Christmas tree on fire. As we dug into our unconventional Christmas dinner, I realized something important: this was the best Christmas dinner we'd ever had. Not because the food was perfect, though honestly that lasagna was a revelation, but because it was a meal born out of kindness, community, and the willingness to let go of expectations. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, friends, and neighbors, and I saw joy, gratitude, and a sense of togetherness that no amount of planning could have created. Linda caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you, Mom," and I knew she meant it. Not just for the food, but for holding it all together when things fell apart. I squeezed her hand under the table, feeling a wave of love and pride wash over me. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of stories, laughter, and second helpings. The kids put on a makeshift Christmas pageant in the living room, using towels for costumes and a flashlight for the star. The adults lingered at the table, savoring the last bites of dessert and reminiscing about holidays past. Even the oven, which had caused so much trouble, became the punchline of a dozen jokes. "Remember the year we had lasagna for Christmas?" someone said, and everyone burst out laughing. As the night wore on and the guests began to say their goodbyes, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The kitchen was a mess, the turkey was still half-cooked, and my plans had gone completely off the rails, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the love and laughter we shared, the memories we made, and the reminder that sometimes, the best moments come from the most unexpected places. As I stood at the sink, washing dishes with Linda by my side, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the chaos, the mishaps, and the miracle that had turned a potential disaster into a night we'd cherish forever. And as I looked at my daughter, her face glowing with happiness, I realized that this was the true magic of Christmas. Not the perfect meal or the flawless decorations, but the people who come together when you need them most, and the joy that comes from letting go and embracing the beautiful mess of life. After everyone had eaten their fill and then some, the house settled into that familiar, contented hush that only comes after a truly memorable meal. The laughter still echoed in the corners, and the scent of lasagna, deviled eggs, and a dozen other impromptu dishes lingered in the air, mingling with the faintest whiff of pine from the Christmas tree. The kids, their faces sticky with dessert and their bellies full, had retreated to the living room, where they were sprawled out on the rug, half watching a Christmas movie and half dozing in a sugar-induced haze. The adults lingered at the table, sipping coffee and swapping stories, their voices low and warm, the kind of conversation that only happens when everyone is too comfortable to worry about the time. I stood in the kitchen, surveying the aftermath, a mountain of dishes, a countertop littered with crumbs and empty serving platters, and of course, the infamous turkey, still sitting in the cold oven, looking more like a prop than the centerpiece it was meant to be. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. This was not the Christmas dinner I had planned, but as I looked around at the happy, satisfied faces of my family and friends, I realized it was the Christmas dinner we needed. It was then that Linda found me, her footsteps soft on the kitchen tile. She looked different now, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes gentle. The earlier storm of frustration and embarrassment replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and touched my arm. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "can I talk to you for a second?" I nodded, setting down the dish towel and following her into the hallway, away from the noise and bustle of the kitchen. For a moment, we just stood there, mother and daughter, surrounded by the muffled sounds of our family celebrating in the next room. Linda took a deep breath, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I got carried away. I wanted everything to be perfect, and when it all started falling apart, I took it out on you. You always make Christmas special even when things go sideways. I should have helped instead of yelling. I should have trusted you." Her words tumbled out in a rush, and I could see the weight of the day pressing down on her, the guilt and regret mingling with relief and gratitude. I reached out and pulled her into a hug, holding her close the way I used to when she was little and the world seemed too big and scary. "That's what family's for, honey," I whispered. "We pick each other up when things go wrong. We laugh, we cry, and sometimes we eat lasagna instead of turkey. But we do it together. Besides, who needs a perfect turkey when you've got lasagna and love?" Linda laughed through her tears, and I felt her relax in my arms, the last of her tension melting away. We stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, letting the chaos and the noise of the day fade into the background. When we finally pulled apart, Linda wiped her eyes and smiled. "Next year I'm making the lasagna," she said, and we both burst out laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from deep in your belly and leaves you feeling lighter, freer, and more connected than ever. We returned to the kitchen, where the cleanup crew was already in full swing. Tom was loading the dishwasher with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, while Mrs. Jenkins was carefully wrapping up the leftovers, her Tupperware containers multiplying like rabbits on the counter. The bridge club ladies were debating the merits of different salad dressings, and Linda's husband was valiantly scraping the last bits of lasagna from the pan, determined not to let a single bite go to waste. I watched them all, my heart swelling with gratitude. This was what Christmas was all about. Not the food, not the decorations, not even the gifts, but the people who show up, pitch in, and turn a disaster into a memory you'll cherish forever. As the evening wound down and the guests began to gather their coats and say their goodbyes, I found myself standing at the door, hugging each person a little tighter than usual, thanking them for their help, their laughter, and their willingness to embrace the unexpected. The kids, now wide awake again, clamored for one last cookie, and the adults promised to get together again soon, maybe for a New Year's potluck. But this time let's order pizza, just in case. Someone joked, and everyone laughed. When the last guest had gone and the house was finally quiet, I wandered back into the kitchen, where Linda was packing up the leftovers. She handed me a container of lasagna, her eyes twinkling. "For tomorrow," she said, "when you don't feel like cooking." I smiled, thinking of all the years I'd spent trying to make everything perfect, and how in the end, it was the imperfections that made this Christmas truly unforgettable. So let me ask you, have you ever had a holiday disaster turn into something wonderful? What's your craziest Christmas story? Maybe it was a burnt roast, a power outage, or a last-minute scramble to feed a house full of guests. Maybe, like me, you discovered that the best memories are made when things don't go according to plan. I'd love to hear your stories. Share them in the comments below. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're all in this together. And there's nothing more comforting than knowing you're not alone in your holiday chaos. And if you enjoyed this little slice of holiday mayhem, don't forget to hit subscribe. Around here, there's always room at the table for one more story, one more laugh, and one more reminder that perfection is overrated, but love, laughter, and a little bit of lasagna can turn even the biggest disaster into a night you'll never forget. So pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of something warm, and join us for more tales of family, food, and the beautiful messiness of life. Because after all, isn't that what the holidays are really all about?